'cause you can't, you won't, and you don't stop. Or when you can't, you won't, and you don't stop. Mike D coming down for sure.
Having used ethics as a perspective to judge what the right thing to do is, our next step is to look at the right thing from the legal perspective. This is quite a complicated issue and topic to get through, and we'll spend most of the rest of the unit actually doing that. However, the starting point is to understand our legal system and what it is and what it isn't and why it operates the way it is. So this particular module is very foundational. I understand that there's a lot of content. Some people might know a great deal about it. Some people might not know much at all, particularly those who haven't had exposure to it, perhaps international students or students who haven't had much to do with business and the legal environment yet. With that in mind, why don't we outline what we're going to try and do? So this module has 4 key aims. The first aim is to look at what law actually is. Okay, so what role does law play in the role of law in society? The second thing is to look at the Australian legal system and why it operates the way it does, which has a reasonable amount to do with history. So we need to think about the context within which our legal system developed. The third thing we need to look at is how the Australian Constitution works. So who has the power to make what law, for want of a better word, within the Australian national system? And then finally, we're going to look at how the arms of government work together to create, administer, and then judge law by looking at the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. So they're the 4 key things that we're going to try and cover in this particular module. So we're going to start by looking at law, what it is, how we classify it, and what it does. So what is law? I mean, in answering that, what we need to do is to be able to differentiate it from things that look like law. Okay. So the first thing we have is a set of rules. Yes, that's true, but other things have sets of rules, like a game. Okay. So what's the difference between law, which is a set of rules, and a game, which is a set of rules? Okay, well, the second element is it's a set of rules made by the state. Now, when we say state, we're saying state, not like the state of Queensland per se, but really as in a way of expressing a form of government. So they're rules made by the government. Not only that, but there are consequences to breaking the rules. Prosecution and litigation. That's interesting. We've got 2 words there. Yes. Okay. There's 2 different words based upon what kind of law you're breaching and what will happen. So if it's public law, then you will be prosecuted, right? An example is criminal law. Because what happens in criminal law is the state prosecutes you. It's not another individual citizen. Contrast that with litigation, which is what happens when we breach private law. An example of that is contract law. Okay, so if you breach a contract, it's not the government who sues you, it's the other party. They litigate. Okay, so in both kinds of situation, though, there is a consequence, prosecution or litigation, if you break the rules. Okay, and those rules are not made by people, they're made by the government, the state. So, business law then is the set of rules regulated business and business activities made by the state, enforceable by prosecution or litigation. Law is one of those things that we just take for granted. We don't really often sit back to think about what society would be like without law. But it serves so many useful functions, and our businesses wouldn't be able to operate without the law. So what are some specific things that we can think about that the law actually does for us? So the first thing is it obviously resolves disputes, but it maintains social order, and that can even be banning activities that we don't want to have happen, even if we could make a buck at it in business. It makes sure we preserve our community values. Work health and safety is an example where we value people's health and safety more now, and so we enforce that through additional legislation. We can protect disadvantaged with anti-discrimination legislation. We can stabilise the economy. We can prevent misuse of power, such as under consumer law, and rules around things like monopolies and market power. Okay, so there's so many things that the law actually does for us. You'll remember in the first module that we did, we differentiated ethics from law, and that's an important point. So one of the ways we'll do this in this particular unit is to differentiate law from justice, which is an ethical connotations. Hopefully there's a large overlap between what's legal and what is just, but they're not necessarily the same thing. Now, whether you feel it morally justified to break a law probably has a lot to do with your philosophical orientation to law. Okay, so broadly speaking, there's two approaches. There are people who believe in natural law. So people who believe in natural law believe the only valid laws are those that are just, for instance. Okay, so there is real law that is revealed, like human rights, or maybe religious kind of precepts around the rules that we should follow. And they believe they're the laws that we should follow. And that's where law comes from. A different view are legal positivists who believe that the law is what the law is, right? And then you should follow the law because that's what the government has made as the law. So, for instance, a positivist wouldn't want to breach a law no matter how unjust they thought it was, because to them that's the law. Whereas a natural lawyer might say, no, that's not a good law. Okay, that is a purely philosophical position based upon what you believe. Now, whether you believe in natural law or positivist law, there are attributes to a good law. So if citizens are going to be able to abide by law and it's going to have a consistent and fair impact on people, law must be certain, flexible, accessible, and fair. Why does it need to be that? Well, we need certainty so that we need to know what to do. If we're not certain what the law is, we can't work out what we're going to do. You can imagine not being certain whether you could have a contract in place or not with someone, or what the conditions in the contract might actually be. If you weren't certain about that, then you're not certain about the contract, and it's a very unsatisfactory law. Law needs to be flexible, right? It needs to change with society. So we get things like changes in technology, changes in values in society, etc. And our law needs to be flexible. While it's certain, it also needs to be flexible. You start to see there's some tensions here. It needs to be accessible. What does that mean? Well, okay, there's a difference between certainty and accessibility. Being accessible means you can find out what the law is. Okay? So if you want to know, you can find it out. Because there's no point in having a law if you can't find out what it is. Right? So the more accessible a law is, the better law it will be. And of course, we would all hope that a law is fair, that it kind of applies equally. So good law is certain, flexible, accessible, and fair. A key idea related to good law is this idea of the rule of law. Now, the rule of law is central to economic development. Without the rule of law, the systems in place have nothing to rely on. Our economic systems would have little to rely on. As soon as you introduce arbitrary actions and reactions within an economic system, people start to be less willing to invest, they are less certain about what to do, and it inhibits economic development. The rule of law is also central to aspects of justice in society. So it's broader than business, but we're going to concentrate, for instance, of the importance of the rule of law to business because we're doing business law and ethics. So, okay, let's look a little bit deeper at this idea of the rule of law. If we have the rule of law, we get predictable rules that encourage things like investment, risk-taking, and economic activity. It allows the actors, individuals, businesses, and governments, to be held to account for what they do as well. Now, there's no definitive set of guidelines for what it means, but Professor Dicey in the 1700s came up with 3 key principles. So what are these 3 principles? Okay. The law should have absolute supremacy and exclude the use of arbitrary power. Okay. So that means individuals, for instance, or small groups can't overrule the law. Okay. The law is what is supreme. The second thing is that everyone is equal before the law. Okay? So that means that it doesn't matter whether you're a judge, the prime minister, or a government official. If the law applies to you, irrespective of your position. The third thing is that the rights under the legal system are enforceable in the courts, and these exist independently of any constitution. So in essence, the rule of law is saying the rules are supreme, not any individual or group of individuals who can change the rules. The rules are the supreme. We all need to follow the rules, and people can enforce the rules against one another within the courts. If we have that, we have the rule of law, as opposed to the rule of an individual or the rule of a small group. And this is just a great quote trying to take forward the idea of the importance of the rule of law. It's an indispensable foundation for a market economy. It provides the environment, the essential environment for the creation and preservation of wealth, economic security, etc. The rule of law is part of the software of government regulation that's needed to operate the hardware of the free markets. And that's a critical point. Markets only operate when there are rules that are enforceable by the participants. And the fairer and the more open those rules are to the parties enforcing them, the better that market will actually operate. The rule of law makes a major contribution to economic growth, and it creates that infrastructure to promote legal rights as an essential platform for economic development. The cumulative costs of doing without the rule of law in a modern economy are enormous.